Hello, my name is Aaron Dobbs, and today I will be presenting over Chapter 6 of The Flat World in Education, How America's Commitment to Equity Will Determine Our Future. And Chapter 6 specifically looks at 3 different countries and how America could learn some lessons from other nations that have covered or climbed over pretty significant hurdles in their education system to outperform America relative to international standards. So, first, some mapping. And the chapter has 3 major sections. The first is it looks at why America's got this problem of inequality and what's going on, and why America isn't hitting certain standards, why there's a bad apportionment of resources. The second part is it's making some foreign comparisons. There's 3 major examples by which the author traces, the first of which is Finland. Then the author looks at Korea and finally Singapore. And then the author concludes Hammond concludes the chapter by looking at what are the characteristics of these 3 countries, what kind of qualities they all have in common, and those overarching qualities are labeled as steeply improving countries' qualities, and how America could, Hammond's looking at how America could import those qualities into our current public education system. So, what's the major problem? The problem that the author identifies is that there's kind of a cognitive dissonance on the way that America perceives education, insofar as we are overfunded and we're underperforming. There's a lack of equal access. We have the wrong kinds of decentralization because the way in which America is trying to train teachers is not getting them ready for like a career in inquiry-based learning. Rather, it's more about teaching teachers systems of bureaucracy and other kinds of things like that. And Hammond also identifies that we have the wrong kinds of centralization. Some of these countries, like Singapore, for instance, centralizes in a way that doesn't push standardized test scores, but centralizes in a sense of pushing, inquiry-based learning for all students, rather than a certain specific kind of rote memorization on a very, very specific task. So, one of the problems that Hammond identifies is, what could America accomplish as a nation if we could finally set aside what appears to be our de facto commitment to inequality? Why does America still perpetuate these systems that keep certain people down and allow other people to prosper? This purpose, so in this chapter, Hammond briefly describes how 3 very different nations, Finland, South Korea, and Singapore, built strong education systems nearly from the ground up. All 3 countries were radically affected by the Second World War, by Japan and Nazi Germany, and all the same, the Soviet Russia as well, and all the same, through all of that, all these countries have been able to rebuild and outperform American education systems with less resources in half a century. So the thesis, basically the author is looking at teaching capacity and looking at what are the kinds of productive teaching techniques that are sustainable, that create inquiry-based learning systems, critical thinking, and distance these countries from Taylorism and other standardized tests. The author argues that there are productive systems that allow these countries to empower well-trained, well-compensated, lifelong learners as teachers, and that translates to the students. So teaching capacity is a pedagogical process. It basically is a process whereby well-prepared teachers who work in concert around a thoughtful, high-quality curriculum are able to reliably support all students in their learning. The idea is that we're now pushing innovation over regurgitation. It's not something that's encouraged, it's imperative because students are competing against each other in a 21st century economy. So the first country that Hammond looks at is Finland. This is a country that was once very poorly ranked educationally, and through a series of turning around education in a way that almost makes it seem more holistic, it now ranks first in math, science, and reading. According to PISA assessments, its current success is not just with a homogeneous population as well. So the socioeconomic achievement gap has been reduced to 5% since the 1970s. And that's a common counter-argument to Finland's success as well. You have one homogeneous white affluent population, and the author contradictory data to that, saying immigration has increased and over 50% of the immigrants do not speak Finnish as their native mother tongue, yet they're radically outperforming other students who reside in the United States of America. So what are some of the Finnish education concepts that have allowed them to succeed so well? First of which is they provide teachers adequate resources, in that teachers are holding high standards, but those standards are not in the same kind of common core. They're not illustrated in the same way that common core is. They're high standards on a more of an abstract level. You have high qualified teachers who usually have graduate degrees. And finally, the Finnish do really well in balancing how they're going to centralize certain kind of ethoses and pedagogy and decentralizing things in the way that they apportion jurisdiction or authority to specific kinds of teachers. And they have shown to outperform American students in math and science by not pushing standardized tests. So Korea. In the aftermath of Japanese occupation after World War II and then the Korean War from 50 to 53, Korea's education system was decimated. In the 1950s, very, very, very few students were admitted. They had a tracking program that was unsuccessful. By 1970, only 20% of Korean people attended high school. They had something where it was known as exam hell. There was far too much industrialized rote memorization. They move away from that model, and they look more towards creating cultural identity through common nurturing and honing of student inquiry skills and learning real-life applications for the kinds of things that students need to learn. And by 2006, their graduation rates, were moving from 20% to 82.1% of students are moving and are prepared for college. So some elements of the Korean educational philosophy that are fantastically successful. We have a balanced development of mind and body, in that we're trying to, again, have a more holistic or universal approach to the way in which a student is, maybe not universal, but a more personalized to the entire student's needs, rather, approach. Again, it's much more focused at engaging in logical, critical, and creative thinking skills, and developing knowledge skills in the device world for work. The Korean education system is really looking at what kinds of skills can be relayed to students so they have career readiness. The third country that Hammond looks at is Singapore. Singapore is a nation whose secondary education system was decimated by it being a British colony after World War II. There was no compulsory education even by 1965. There's a lot of ethnic fracturing between language, between Mandarin, Tamil, English, many other languages that have all coalesced in Southeast Asia. There's a lack of a common direction. And from that, in about 30 years, the Singaporean government was able to piece together this autonomous but unified system of a patchwork group of schools that all work to create independent systems of student learning. So this was formally best typified in 1997 with the launch of an initiative called Thinking Schools, Learning Nations. And this is something that fostered creative and critical thinking and culture within schools. And it teaches real-life skills on how students can learn and master those skills and then demonstrate how that will work in their career life rather than just on a worksheet or a work problem or some kind of rote memorization or non-essential arithmetic. The big push, again, is to have inquiry-based culture. And one of the ways that they value education is by looking at people as a resource. The education system is meant to, the goal of the education system is described as developing the talents of each individual so that they can all contribute to society. So finally, Hammond closes her chapter 6, with outlining some common shared traits amongst all nations, Finland, Korea, and Singapore, which are all very geographically different, but outperforming the United States for 6 similar reasons. One, they have adequately funded schools. They don't have the problem of a gross disproportion of funding based on racial difference or something like that, that the United States sadly still has. They have gotten rid of, STAR or Common Core kind of EOC exams that are massively standardized. They have revised national curriculum standards to look more at how can we give kids career and college readiness skills. They have created teacher education systems that make teachers lifelong learners and value teachers for their time, compensate them well. And finally, they're looking at long-term reform goals and how they can change generations and look at generational improvement on 10, 15, 20-year goals based on incremental improvements in the education system. Okay, that's Chapter 6. Thank you so much. My name is Aaron Dobbs.